Welcome back to this week's free episode of Trash Future Season 3.
Season 3.
It's me, Riley. I'm here, not in studio, with Milo.
Hello, it's me, your boy, social distancing. I am actually healthier than I've ever been. I'm eating like balanced meals because my mum's cooking and I'm like exercising every day. This is wild. A pandemic has made me healthier. What the hell?
Yeah.
What was wrong with my life before?
We also have Alice in quarantine Glasgow.
Salvate omnes. Looking forward to using all of my useless classical education on this one.
That's right. Ita Wero. We also have Hussein calling in from sunny southwest London.
It is not sunny. Actually, no, it is kind of sunny. I've had my blinds down. I haven't opened any of my blinds since I quarantined 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. You're doing the reverse. You're doing the reverse of miasma theory of disease. And we are also very excited to be joined by Patrick Wyman, who is the host of Tides of History podcast, and who also hosted the Fall of Rome podcast, which is a self-contained series you can find. I heartily recommend both. You should pause this and check them both out now if you haven't. But Patrick, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So we decided to have Patrick, who's a specialist in late antiquity, and let's say the decline of what you'd consider the Roman Empire on for just... It's a coincidence, actually. We've had it... we've had it booked for 2 years. It's totally a coincidence. But like we said in the first episode of season 3, trying to understand the ways in which, let's say, the neoliberal order might be coming apart at the seams a little bit when faced with any pressure that requires it to have slack in the system. Like we said, that's doing gravity lessons when we've already stepped off the ledge, learning from these previous imperial falls to try and understand what's going on in the moment of rupture.
Yeah, it's a bit late.
We're doing Looney Tunes shit. We're walking off the cliff, but we're still going in a straight line until we look down.
Yes, that's what we're doing. This episode will be an hour of us just looking down before we start falling.
I mean, do we have Acme painted anywhere just to make sure we're getting the brand integration?
Yeah, that's right.
Matt Hancock running into a huge black circle painted on a cliff face.
Even better, did we see Dominic Cummings doing his Roadrunner act out of the front door of Downing Street? So yeah,
he's sprinting out.
I would find it.
It's great.
I would find that very funny if he was running out, but it was for a completely unrelated coronavirus reason. He has this massive backpack. You don't know what's inside the backpack, but it's a completely unrelated thing. That's
oh no, I have to make this delivery.
Right. He's actually doing side hustles as a Deliveroo guy.
Dominic Cummings is doing Death Stranding in real life.
All right. But before we get into talking about history, I want to talk a little bit about death cults, because I think we may have identified a modern day Mithridatic cult.
Wait, I didn't know we were doing an episode about the Republican Party.
The damn clowns in Congress.
Yes, finally, someone's going to speak truth to the clowns in Congress. So what's happened is some Federalist morons and various Republican governors, exemplified by Jesse Kelly, who's I think one of the Federalist idiots, said, if given the choice between dying because of going to work and catching coronavirus and plunging the country I love into a depression, I'd happily die. That's it. We have Fedayeen for the Dow Jones.
They finally got their war. It's great. We feel so great about it.
This is what it is. It's American jihad, right? It's but it's it's American jihad in the sense the principle is the same, i.e. you're sacrificing your body and your soul for God. But in this case, God is the stock market. God is General Motors, Facebook, and McDonald's. And the thing about Islamic jihad is that at least you kind of the reward that comes out of it provides a decent incentive. You get the 72 virgins and you get the palace and everything. Whereas in America, it's the jihad doesn't even pay off, right? You just leave generational debt. Right, you get
it's an aspirational jihad.
Aspiration.
In American heaven, you get all the Mountain Dew you can drink.
Hold up. I want to turn to Patrick, and I want to say, how does this compare to Roman death cults?
How does this compare to Roman death cults? This one is not as cool. I think that's fairly straightforward. Like it's not as interesting like dying for a blooming onion or like some mid-range boneless buffalo wings as it is to die for some sort of like really like there were some cool death cults, and there was like the Romans did cool stuff with death. Like if nothing else, it could be mass entertainment, but like there's nothing fun or interesting about like drowning in fluid alone in a hospital room, like or like a parking garage or something, which is probably where we're headed.
Patrick, you subscribe to my OnlyFans. We get it.
Like that's not nearly as much fun as like getting eaten by a tiger for the like to the cheers of a few hundred drunk Romans. Like this is not as interesting or as fun.
We should do the thing that Alan Sugar believes Russia actually did of letting loose lions on the streets to encourage self-quarantine.
Alan Sugar fucking rules. I love that guy. Like a guy invented like a big clunky landline phone you can send an email from in 2002, and then for some reason he was in the government for a while because that's just Britain.
But I also love the idea. It's like in ancient Rome, like you'd kneel down and be covered by the blood of a slaughtered bull as you were inducted into like the death cult inner circle. Here, you just, you walk out the door and you say, I am not willing to sacrifice my treats. I will sacrifice my life before I sacrifice my treats.
Dolce et decorum est pro patria Wendy's.
Yeah, it's so important for me to give the Schnippers delivery guy a big wet kiss on the lips.
Yeah, look, like in the United States, if you can't drown in ranch dressing, then you're not really living. Like that is the point of living in the United States, is that like you can get a tub of ranch or blue cheese or just like a literal gallon of soda and kill yourself. And that's the United States. Like if you can't do that, then you're not really alive.
But farm hands been drowning on this farm for many a long year, drowning in that there silo ranch dressing nobody cared before.
The other thing I want to talk about, because it's crazy that like the United States like has dropped nuclear bombs, obliterated like millions of lives, caused untold misery everywhere just to keep this consumer economy going, and now they're like, I will die for the tater tot. But also. When faced with the prospect of people like getting support through this time when they can't go to work or they'll die in the UK, where we don't have a president who's just being like, well, fuck it, go back to work anyway, see if you live, it'll make you stronger, builds character. Douglas Carswell, the former leader of UKIP and noted fucking moron, the proof that Oxford doesn't make you smart, said that any kind
did he go
of
to Oxford? Jesus.
Unfortunately, yes.
Even by Oxford standards, that one's a slip up.
Shut the fuck up, Carswell said, a basic income for like freelancers and people off work was tried by the Romans in 123 BC, and it specifically destroyed the Republic. Patrick, what do you think about that?
Which is why they continue to do it in the Empire.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like on the grand list of things that destroyed the Roman Republic on a scale from aristocratic self-interest and private armies to nailing Cicero's hands to the Senate door, like the Annona was not like high up on the list.
I mean, also,
that's just one man's opinion. It's just one man's opinion.
It's such a bad analogy for UBI because what it was a corn. Like they just gave people corn. It's food stamps. That's what it is.
Yes. Yeah. It's not a universal basic income. Like the Romans. Like it's just like everything about that was dumb. Everything about it was a bad like attempt to shoehorn in what I assume is probably a god awful book. And so like I give him credit for trying at least. But wow, not good.
Before we move on to the meat of this topic, though, right, I also want to reflect on something. All these people, like, who are promising to die for the economy, or who are willing to, like, just torpedo millions of lives so, like, the liberal job market stays exactly as it was, which, of course, is eternally true. It's never been anything different. What the fuck are Jesse Kelly and Douglas Carswell going to do by going to work that's going to save the economy? They're both professional simpletons.
They're gonna kiss the delivery guys. They're gonna go into work and like type out the same fucking article about how there's too many genders, and actually that's quite like Elagabalus, and then like all die. It's great.
The trouble with Heliogabalus was he refused to pick one gender. If he'd have just picked one, it would have all have been fine.
I mean, if they die and the last thing that they write is the same gender joke about identifying as an Apache helicopter, like that is technically martyrdom, right? So this is like their jihad.
I just love the idea of like a Roman shithead being like, actually, I identify as a war chariot.
I'm Spartacus.
All right. Settle down, children. So I want to move to our main topic, which is the fall of Rome. What was it? What does it mean? How should we understand it in the context of what's going on now? And I guess I'll kick us off not with the correct view that we'll explain later, but the commonly held and deeply wrong view, the one that we get from British historian Edward Gibbon, which is essentially that morally degenerate emperors spent too much time getting sucked off and doing cosmopolitan weird elitism and not doing good Roman values. His main culprit was a concept called decadence. Patrick, can you explain a little more this theory?
Okay, so in Gibbon's mind, decadence encompassed a few things, but yeah, I mean, I think the getting sucked off and doing weird cosmopolitan elitism thing was a big part of it. In Gibbon's mind, that was the adoption of Christianity was the big piece of evidence for that, or the big manifestation of his concept of decadence, and that Christianity in particular, and this kind of broader idea of decadence, decoupled the Romans from their traditional civic values and virtues, and those, in Gibbon's mind, had underpinned the empire.
They lost track with real America, with Main Street.
Exactly. They lost touch with the Chili's and the Applebee's, and at that point, the empire fell.
All the guys who owned like horse-drawn jet ski dealerships were just absolutely furious with the emperor.
Yeah. The moderate latifundia we thought would rally against Nero. So this is all wrapped up in the year 476, when the last sort of properly quote-unquote Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, is like the last of a series of pretty much bad leaders. But that's not just
Romulus
Gibbon's
Augustulus
propaganda
sounds
about
deeply like a SoundCloud rapper.
Yeah, but that's not just Gibbon's propaganda about Britain, because most historians tend to write to make an argument, or many historians, especially ones in like 18th century Britain, were writing to make an argument about their present day. Right? It's also even the product of Emperor Justinian's propaganda about reconquest, like this idea that there was a dramatic fall because of some bad leaders. It's just sort of layers and layers of propaganda of people trying to make a point about their own time.
Exactly. Yeah. So the 476 date, as far as we can tell, actually comes initially from a source called the Chronicle of Marcellinus Comes, Marcellinus the Count, who was an official in the court of Justinian, late 520s, early 530s. He wrote a chronicle. It's an interesting chronicle, lots of good stuff in there. But this is the first time when we get to see the 476 date. But the whole point is that comes out of Justinian's circle. It is quite literally propaganda, especially because there was still a guy claiming to be the Western Emperor until 480, Julius Nepos. So like the 476 date, if you're looking for that, isn't even a good one. Romulus Augustulus is pretty unimportant. It matters a great deal if you're Justinian, what is that? Like 50 years later, trying to make a good argument as to why you should sweep back and reclaim the Western Empire. That's the context in which it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think the reason I'm talking about this now is that it's really important to compare this story and the sort of falseness of this story, its propagandistic nature, to all of the people who are saying that Trump is the problem of why we can't respond to this crisis.
We have to go back to before the psychic trauma of 2016.
Listen, I've had Jared write a chronicle. It's a beautiful chronicle. It really explains all the problems going on today. A lot of very nasty problems that we're going to get to the bottom of.
I love that it's Trump getting Jared to write a chronicle about which of the decadent magazine editors have been very unfair to him. Very cool. But like the idea is, there is this idea, I think it's a fundamentally liberal one, that we can just go back to normal if we remove the Trump or the Johnson or undo the Brexit, and that without these things causing chaos everywhere, we would not be experiencing such difficulty in the face of a system-testing pandemic. And it's like people who were saying this, like maybe they were saying in 480 in Rome, man, I wish we could go back to the 212 Olympic Games opening ceremony put on by Caracalla. That was the high point of our society. I just want to go back then.
Hell yeah.
Because that would require in Rome acknowledging that by the year 212, which I think it had, the rot had already set in. You can't go back. These aren't short-term problems. They're long-term problems that just all become apparent at once.
Oh, but have you considered Orange Man bad?
So, Patrick, I'm going to quote from your article here because from Mother Jones, which I thought was really excellent. The popular story version of this particular falling empire might focus on a twice-divorced serial philanderer and bullshit artist and make him the villain, rendering his downfall or ultimate triumph the climax of the narrative. But it's far more likely that the real meat of the issue will be found in a tax code full of sweetheart deals for the ultra-wealthy, the slashed budgets of county public health offices, the lead-contaminated water supplies, probably literally for Rome, and that's to say nothing of the decades of pointless, self-perpetuating, and almost undiscussed imperial wars that will produce no victories but plenty of expenditures in blood and treasure and a great deal of justified ill will. So can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so this is basically an argument for deep, long-term structural processes being more important than these individuals like Trump and Boris Johnson. Like, it's not to say that they don't matter at all. Like, I think as we're seeing fairly clearly with regard to the pandemic, the responses of people at the top who are making decisions do matter to some extent, but but the context has already been set. The context has been set long before. It doesn't matter whether Donald Trump is in charge or Joe Biden or whoever. It doesn't change the fact that you don't have a functional system of public health in the United States. It doesn't change the fact that you don't have single payer health care. It doesn't change the fact that when millions of people lose their jobs, as they would have under absolutely any circumstances, that those people were going to lose their health insurance in the face of a pandemic. It doesn't change any of that. It doesn't change the fact that county public health offices have been getting their budget slashed, especially for the last decade since the Great Recession, but also for much longer than that. It doesn't change regional inequality. It doesn't change the decades and decades of growing inequality within society. Like, it doesn't change any of that. Like, all of those are the set conditions within which our feckless leaders are playing.
Of course. And
this being the gravity, right? This is the materialist.
Exactly. Yes, this is the materialist explanation.
By the way, if you're listening at home, please imagine all of us standing just like 1 meter off of a ledge, holding up all of this on a sign.
This is the big road closed sign that we just have battered straight through. Bridge out.
But this is also the narrative of people like Sarah Kendizor, Andrew Adonis, and Edward Gibbon. It's that there is one particular short-term malign influence, and their awfulness cascades down and makes society bad. So whether that's Nero or Romulus Augustulus or Donald Trump or Boris Johnson, it doesn't deal with the fact that even a good leader wouldn't have been prepared to face this crisis. They may have faced it a little bit better, but they would be using the same decayed set of tools to do it.
I just love the idea that fucking Suetonius or whoever would just have been a poster, would just have done the listen up, fuck knuckles, it's time for a thread, brackets, question mark.
Suetonius is probably my favorite Roman historian because he just includes absolutely mental, spurious details in every account that he gives. There's no evidence for. When it's just this bit where he's like, well, the thing about Tiberius was that he used to go swimming and then make boys nibble his nuts while he was swimming around.
Well, the thing is, right, one of the things that I feel like we're learning from our present time is that all of the stuff that we know deeply in our bones to be true is incredibly stupid. So I feel like in 500 years' time, even as little as that, we'll be and they thought there was a tape of Trump watching sex workers peeing on a bed? No, come on. They couldn't have been as venal or as stupid as that.
I've just been reading the account of one Jolius Mormo of the famous Brexit debate in the Senate.
Yeah, I think one of the big lessons of history is that it is always that stupid. It's always that dumb. Martin Luther, for just to move us ahead about 1,000 years, Martin Luther was obsessed with scatological humor. He just always made shit jokes 100% of the time. And every
Another
metaphor that
poster.
came into his mind was one of just like shit or some other equally gross bodily function. That's just how he thought. But like we tend to write
Throw
that out
enough
of
shit at the
Luther's
door of a church,
biographies.
some of it will stick.
So Martin Luther would have been an anime guy in 2020.
Yeah.
He'd be
There's
an
no
anime
question.
Twitter guy who just like has a bizarre knowledge of like anime titties.
No, he'd be Sargon of Akkad.
All that.
Won't explain further.
Sargon of
So-
Uwu.
I want to go back to something that you another thing you've written, Patrick, because I think we've thoroughly poo-pooed the idea that this great man theory of history that sort of comes up every once and again, or the great man or awful man or individual. So the way you talk about the fall of Rome, I'm going to read from your article again. So the idea of a fall is now passé, and for better and for worse, scholars prefer to speak of a transformation of the Roman world taking place over centuries, or better still, a long, culturally distinct and important in its own right late antiquity spanning the Mediterranean world and beyond. If the Roman Empire ever did come to a real end, it was a long, slow process spanning many lifetimes, hardly the stuff of dramatic narratives. And one of the things I think that you explain very well about this is how the event, the fall of Rome, in capitals and quotation marks, would be experienced differently in like York versus Ravenna versus Provence. Like the fall of Rome is not the same thing to these people, just as the fraying of the American polity is not the same thing in California as it is in Kansas, or in England as it is in Scotland, and so forth.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, whenever you have any polity is going to include a diverse set of conditions, right? And that was true. That's very true of the United States right now. It's true. It's true of Britain. It's true of and it was true of the Roman Empire. Like whenever you have that much variation in terms of the density of urban populations, the military presence, what the economy looks like, how connected you are to kind of the core Mediterranean area, it's going to look and feel a lot different. It's going to look different if you're a soldier stationed on the frontier than if you're a sailor who's working out of Carthage. It's going to look different, which will look different still than if you're a wealthy aristocrat at your summer house in the countryside. Like, each of those is a different experience of this, and it's going to look different at different times too. Like, it depends on whether you're talking about the year 400 or you're talking about 450 or 500 or 550. Like, each of those different times and places is going to experience this set of processes much differently. I think in our current context, that only really became clear to people with Brexit and the election of Donald Trump, that like these twin shocks, that like if you're living in a rotted out industrial town, your like what you think 2016 looks like is very different than if you're living in a posh apartment in London or Los Angeles or New York. Like your thought of what the baseline state of the world is, and therefore your experience of this person or people or message is going to look much different. It's going to feel much different, and you're going to respond to it differently.
Now I'm just imagining like Roman libs having their brain melted by Donald Trump or his equivalent being elected and claiming that it was all Visigoth interference.
One thing I did want to put to you, Patrick, and we kind of talked about this, we kind of preempted this by talking about Justinian, is if you just talk about the fall of Rome as being this like long, kind of very highly variable process, you can get the sense, well, why do we have this idea of a capital F, capital R fall of Rome? Why do we have this idea of there being one thing that happened? And I think it's worth saying that like it's always been a useful idea for all sorts of political purposes to be like, Rome has fallen. And like Romans themselves loved this shit, right? They loved to be melodramatic, and they loved to say, I have stubbed my toe. This is the collapse of the empire and all of its values, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. The Romans started talking about Roman decline before the Republic had even gone away. Like they were like, it was a deeply Roman thing to compare yourself to your ancestors and find yourself wanting. Like that, there was nothing more Roman than thinking that your grandpa was just a badass old shithead, and that like
it's and like that Cato the Elder's whole vibe is just like everything is bad now, past good.
Exactly. It's like it's the whole the Romans were doing the pussification of America a long time before those articles appeared in the Federalist. You know what I mean? Like that was, so there's nothing more deeply Roman than that. And yeah, it was a useful idea. It was a useful cudgel with which to beat the present day or whomever with the sense that there was something wrong, that something had gone wrong and that it was fixable if only we did this. And that's the same reason it's useful now. The same reason that people talk about the fall of the Roman Empire now is because it's a dramatic cudgel with which to beat people.
Yeah, I'm loving the idea of Sulla just rolling his eyes at the woke Stasi of the Gracchi. In 753 BC, honestly, if the people who went around seizing women from nearby states could see this,
but like, I'm so glad that you said that, because I wanted to include that little bit of like self-criticism, because it's not to say that like this is not a useful framework for exploring a lot of the things that have gone wrong, right? It's just that like there is a certain element where we can say, oh, you doing a podcast about the fall of Rome is not really a, like, that doesn't mean that we're talking about a thing that we can definitely say has now happened, right? We're doing politics here.
Yeah. And like, I would never, like, it's partially just because I'm a miserable bastard to start with, right? And so like, I'm drawn to this kind of framework. Like, I think it kind of fundamentally accords with the way that I understand the world. And so like, that's a framework that's always made sense to me. I think it's worth arguing about what it is and what you do with it. The biggest reason that I think it's worthwhile, and this would be my basic defense of the framework of fall or end, to use those kinds of terms instead of transformation or even just the long late antiquity, is I think it's important for us to understand that things can come to an end. I think the reason why the 90s were the high point of this transformation stuff was because at that point, in the wake of the end of the Soviet Union, we're living in Francis Fukuyama's end of history. There was no real sense that anything could ever get worse. I think it's really bound up with this kind of implicit narrative of progress that you know, the moral arc of the universe has to bend toward justice. And so the reason why I would go in the opposite direction, it's not solely to be contrarian. It's because things can get worse. People can die. You can have pandemics and plagues. The economy can fall apart. Political order can fall apart. Violence can increase. Like, I think it's important for us to be able to just say that this is a possible range of outcomes. It's not to say that things get worse for everybody. You know, what is better? What is worse? If you're a peasant living in the late 6th century, you're probably better off than you would have been living on some shithead Roman landlord's like estate. Life has not necessarily gotten worse for you, but there may be half as many people. So trade-offs, you know what I mean?
We're kind of skipping ahead here because we do have some stuff about like the various possible outcomes of this. But But
I also I want to sort of go into that a little more, right? Where we talk about, well, are you better or worse off? So what I always keep thinking of in this case is when polities of a certain size collapse, or rather they become unable to support the institutions that keep them running. So for example, like the money economy that was centered in Rome kept Britain in fungible currency and made it possible to, say, be a specialist potter living in a market town, or a trader living in a market town, or a clerk of some kind. And that the moment that the Roman state lost its ability to continue shipping coins to Britain, Britain then became a less complex, less specialized, more diverse, more sort of feudal society pretty quickly, because those institutions from the center of the polity were not able to continue to support that level of social complexity.
Yeah, and this is something that historians love to argue about, what the end of Roman Britain looked like. And right now we're in a phase where they're like, oh, well, was it really that extreme? Was there really that much migration? And their point is well taken. Like, I understand that there really were some like long-term continuities between Roman Britain and the Anglo-Saxon world that followed. I get that. But yes, people did arrive. There was a lot of migration. We can tell this from a whole bunch of different sources. Migration is actually the simplest explanation for why you end up with the English language, for why you end up with the kind of genetic patterns that you end up with in the English population.
Because back then you could say you were English, whereas now,
I mean, it really just like I don't know. Like, to some extent, I'm just kind of like, are you crazy? Like, there were cities and then there weren't cities. Like, people were making wheel thrown pottery and then they weren't. People were building in stone and then they weren't. Like, even if that's not a catastrophe, you don't have to call that a catastrophe. That's a pretty marked shift, and it happens pretty dang fast. Like, it happens within the course of a lifetime or a generation and a half. Like, you could literally experience the end of the Roman economy as a thing where the state is continuously pumping money. The state as a fiscal mechanism is continuously pumping money through the provinces. You could experience the end of that, the end of urban life, and the arrival of a whole bunch of people who didn't used to live there within one lifetime. That seems fairly marked to me.
Yeah, imagine that.
Sounds like they were doing a Venezuela on Roman Britain.
I love the idea of like a shithead Roman nationalist, and I know these guys existed, and I know there's like a surprisingly good analog to this of being like, the only mechanism of governance that we know how to do to expand the empire is to do war and then to create client states and then to destabilize those client states. Why now is there mass migration? This is going to be the fall of Rome because of the migrants.
I wonder if there was like Roman Paul Joseph Watson. I just remembered, like, remember, like,
imagine my shock.
A much smaller map on the wall behind it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I tried to do when I was doing Fall of Rome, what seems like many years ago now, is that, like, especially the Visigoths, when they crossed the Danube in 376, and it's like, oh, this is the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire. They were refugees. They cut a deal. Like, they were going to do military service in return for being settled on land. Like, that was, they held up their end of the deal. The Romans didn't.
Islamizing the Roman Empire, is it?
It's like,
I read
they were refugees.
I read somewhere, perhaps in like a W.H. Smith book, that there was a Visigoth doctor that was like secretly converting Roman babies. That was like the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire. I can't remember who it was
from. I love to have a gothic no-go zone in my cities. There's just a bunch of guys standing around wearing helmets with nose guards, looking sinister.
Yeah, they were wearing trousers. It was a whole thing, like
trying to trick you into whispering mysterious Germanic chants and shanties.
It would be Gaul would do a ban on the trouser.
Yeah.
So I want to refocus us on this idea, going back to the idea of well, we know that the capacity of the polity, whether that's conceived of as the Roman Empire or the imperial household or the Roman state or whatever you want to call it, the reduction in capacity, and that being down to tons and tons of small decisions all sort of being taken that are all the wrong one. Things getting underfunded, payments not arriving, maybe a bribe being paid in lieu of taxes. And I think that we can see this we can take Gibbon's idea of decadence, right? This idea that there are just bad people in charge and reframe it to be a structural force, right? Yeah. We can say that the real problem is the massive concentration of wealth in the hands of a shrinking elite whose interests weren't immoral and weird and foreign like Gibbon thought they were, so much as they were just disconnected from and frequently at odds with the interests of the polity.
It's not getting sucked off in the Domisoria that makes you the bad person. The bad person is having the Domisoria in the first place. And it's not that you lose touch with like Main Street Rome or whatever. It's that you have a fundamentally inimical, or at the very least indifferent, class interest at work there, right?
I love that. We need to reconnect government with your ordinary via Appia Roman.
I love the idea that there was like a Roman Bill Clinton just like getting sucked off in the emperor's office.
So Patrick, could you sort of speak to the problem of inequality and its root and its presence at the root of the decline of Rome, should you want to call it that?
Yeah, so there is no better parallel, I think, in terms of the sheer level of inequality and the sheer wealth concentrated in very few hands for the present day as the Western Roman Empire, where you had all of these old senatorial families, these like incredibly inbred, incredibly wealthy, like effectively each of these families is a large multinational corporation. You know, you have estates in North Africa, and you've got estates in Italy, and you've got estates in various parts of Gaul, and you've got estates in Spain, and you're doing business on this insane scale. And so the marriage of two members of two of these families is essentially a corporate merger on an enormous scale. that is the closest parallel for the kind of wealth in private hands that we have in the present day, I think. And why this matters is that, yes, their interests were incredibly disconnected from those of the state, because the state was not drawing from that group of people to serve as bureaucrats and military officers. Like the aristocrats were off doing their own thing. Their thing was basically, getting sucked off in their enormous villas. They were incredibly disconnected from the processes of doing power. And so when they got other offers, or when they had the opportunity to disconnect from the power structures that were, taxing them or making them do things that they thought were beneath them, they took that. Like if a barbarian comes through and says, okay, I'm king of this place now, you can pay me half of what you were paying them in taxes and I'll leave you alone. Like that's a deal that Roman aristocrats took over and over and over and over again whenever they were presented with the opportunity to do it.
I wonder if they were that annoying that you have like fucking Claudia Metelli is on The View talking about her dad.
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely that annoying.
God damn. But like the parallel I see there, right, between this sort of the political and economic elite just having their interests just disconnected from the society that they run. Is also like, look at all of those senators who were briefed on coronavirus on January 24th and sold off a bunch of stock, made millions of dollars, and then blithely told the public nothing was going to go wrong.
It's called the free market. Consumer choice.
There's something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I'm not entirely sure how to go with where it leads. But yes, I think it's not even just the ultra wealthy. It's that the wealthy, I think, are increasingly disconnected from their localities. Like, I think we have much more of a kind of I don't know if even cosmopolitan is the right word, but it's like, in my part of the world where I grew up, there were a lot of very wealthy, like agricultural families. Like they were all into commercial agriculture, but like they didn't spend, increasingly, they don't spend their money in the town where I grew up. They spent their money in Hawaii or Palm Springs or like Arizona. And where they would just go and hang out with other similarly rich people from elsewhere. And that was what shaped their understanding of the world. It had absolutely nothing to do with their employees or the place that they were from. Like they thought of themselves as kind of like, I don't know if cosmopolitan's the right word, because they were not like jetting off
if we can do the Alex Jones thing, globalist, right? Because as a result of a process of globalization rather than meaning it with the like fucking brackets around the side of it.
Listen, I'm a cosmopolitan. I've been to every cheesecake factory in the United States.
and to be clear, when we say cosmopolitan or globalist, we do not mean it with the parentheses like Alex Jones might.
No, I am not touching the reverb dial.
Yeah. But I think
the gender dial.
What we can think about there, right, is that like quite often the fall of an empire, whether it's Rome or America or whatever, is portrayed as this big tragedy. And there's no big imperial tragedy to Rome or even ourselves. It's simply that people like Kelly Loeffler or Julius Nepos or Richard Branson or Jeff Bezos or Elon Crassus Musk are never, ever going to be able to donate enough ventilators or masks or grain to staunch the bleeding, because the wound is one that they made and that they constantly remake by continuing to reproduce their own wealth and power.
Yeah. It's not a moral issue. It's not a question of vice and virtue. The fact that a lot of these people are themselves deeply immoral, it doesn't really enter into it, right? Because it's a question of their class interest. You can be a massive philanthropist and still have this interest where you just like, I just have the amount that it would take to have several thousand ventilators just kind of chilling in my account, and I'm not going to do anything about it.
Well, that's how you start a civilization on Mars, by having that kind of amount of money in your bank account. How else are you going to go to Mars and have your head explode like in Total Recall?
I love to remember the time when Jeff Bezos said that he talked about his money as his winnings, which is very revealing, but then he said that he couldn't think of anything more productive or anything else to do with it other than space exploration. Yeah, that's great.
Well, look,
I love to be thinking about that.
They're just practicing billionaire self-care, right? It's the idea of, well, you could use you could spend your life, devoting yourself to other people's needs, but then you're neglecting yourself at the same time. So if you really think about it, blowing yourself up in space is more important than spending your money on ventilators.
Space jihad.
What is Gundam Wing other than space jihad?
This is some memory TV shit that I predict will come true.
So
that's how you end up with like all of these Roman aristocrats in the 5th century building themselves ever larger and more opulent villas, while nobody is funding like defense against raiding barbarians.
What's the Roman equivalent of space exploration? What's the thing you can just throw money into a pit about and be like, well, couldn't think of anything else for this?
The church?
Damn.
I mean, really, like they just donated huge amounts of money and land and all sorts of valuables to the church, which is why the church builds up enough institutional foundation to survive the next several centuries, right?
Yeah. Damn, I hear Marcus Agrippa has built himself a large fortified camp in Nova Zealandia.
So I mean, what you're saying is that like churches basically kind of operate back then in the same way that like startups do now, right?
Yeah, they're more durable. Like once you get a little further into a little more durable. But yeah, I mean, they're like the church is one place where aristocrats would go to make themselves feel better about their money.
Churches are like Soho houses of post Rome.
So, but I want to move on. I want to move on quickly though, which is that like we can talk about an actual example. Again, in both the Roman polity and today, of the interests of the wealthy becoming deeply at odds with the general interest of the polity, which is basically the fact that like the Romans, they had steam power, like they knew about it. They even used it for like fripperies and desk toys and making church doors open so it looked like God was doing it. But massive dependence on slaves from like wealthy established aristocrats and landowners basically forestalled steam power from ever becoming anything actually industrial, right?
I hear if you sit on your arm for like half an hour before you jack it, it feels like God's doing it.
So Patrick, could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so basically the argument that economists would make is that and I think it's a fairly convincing one, is that there's very little incentive for that kind of innovation. Just to use the most buzzwordy terms we can possibly think of, like you're never going to get to the kind of continuous industrial growth that we expect from our present day circumstances if you have an enormous population of slaves, and also where you're expressing your social status as a member of the elite through your ownership. Right? Through your ownership of slaves and through your ownership of property. Like, what are you trying to get out there and like perform growth for if you've got what you wanted, and what you wanted is social status as reflected through your ownership?
I'm so glad that we don't have an easy analog to something that prevents us from developing new technology because it's abundant and it allows like an easy show of wealth. I say as I sip my fucking Brent crude.
I mean, well, like that's
I'm really excited for a CEO to get buried with hundreds of Deliveroo riders.
I mean, we're not that far from that. Like, just to bring it all the way back around to what we were talking about at the very, very beginning. But I mean, like that's one of the interesting and useful things is that like Roman society and the ancient world was not capitalist. Right, like there were it was not capitalism. There were capitalists, I think you can say. I think you can look just about anywhere in history and find capitalists in terms of people who are using their money in the interest of generating profit for themselves, who are investing, who have an eye toward growing their resources. Those people exist, but it's not the same thing as having a system that values and places that kind of investment and growth as the set goal. If that makes any sort of sense at all.
Yeah,
and like I think that's where the disconnect
governing
is.
Things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like
they didn't have the line. That was only invented later.
What I think the point I'm trying to getting to here, right, is that a political economy keyed to the enrichment of the people in control of that political economy will tend to hold back on delivering improvements that deliver quality of life changing like inventions. So like the Romans just The incentives in ancient Rome were around status and so on, and the large amount of slaves and wars of conquest meant that the slave economy was durable, and it was very difficult to develop things that were ultimately better for people's quality of life long term, like steam power. And it's the same. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing in our case, where we have this massive dependency on oil, but like Shell knew that global warming was going to destroy the world. And by the way, that's the thing that's still coming to destroy the world. It hasn't stopped. It hasn't been replaced by another crisis. But they deliberately sat on it. And so you can see, right, like that the people controlling the energy who work at Shell, just as the people who controlled the Roman economy, like they just not only were there strong incentives for low-level corruption and bad decision-making at a social level, there were also no incentives for improvements to happen when it was profitable for the people in control to not improve.
Yeah, and that's why Trash Future. That's why Trash Future. That's why this podcast is. This is why you have the question: why do we have all of this abundance, and why is it producing these perverse, sort of useless gewgaws instead of, say, I don't know, ventilators? Why is it giving me a smart salt shaker? Why is it giving me a van that cooks the pizza in the back of it while it delivers it to me instead of healthcare?
And I'm just spitballing here, but like, what if we got people to be more scared of climate change by rebranding it something like Chinese warming?
Like, is it really a crisis if you can't identify it with a scary other?
Exactly.
But like, Patrick, like the late Roman Empire, like, it wasn't a poor place, right?
No, no, there was it was economically sophisticated. The material standard of living for a lot of people was higher than it had been in a very, very long time, or would be again for another 1,000-ish years. Like, in terms of your access to consumer goods, like you could get fancy ass pottery, you could get really good. You could criticize
the empire, yet you're writing that on a fancy pot. Curious.
Exactly. Look at how nice your wax tablet is. Look at that papyrus. Yeah, I mean, in terms of pure material sophistication, the variety of consumer goods you could acquire, the amount of wealth in circulation in society, state capacity. Yes, the late Roman Empire could do more than any state before or after for a very, very, very long time. Your average person had access to goods from much further away than they would before. Their per capita GDP in the Roman world was higher than it would be again for a very, very long time. But yeah, it's a question of incentives. Who has the money? What are they doing with it? And what's the point? And the point was not to make the life of your average tenant farmer any better.
Yeah, and even then, it's not to make the life of the average tenant farmer any better. Maybe that was cut out, I don't know, when the Gracchi didn't really go all the way. But like, you could even see
why did this Gaius Gracchus have to yell?
But even then, it's once you can no longer improve the lives of the tenant farmers, fine. But then it goes to gutting the capacity of the polity to do anything. So, Patrick, I want to go back to your article. The fall of an empire, the end of a polity, a socioeconomic order, a dominant culture, or the intertwined whole looks more like a cascading series of minor, individually unimportant failures than a dramatic ending that appears out of the blue. Carts full of olive oil failing to arrive at some nameless fort because of a dysfunctional military bureaucracy, a corrupt official deciding to cook the books and claim taxes were not collected when they really weren't, a greedy aristocrat bribing the official instead of paying his bill, an aqueduct falling to pieces and no one willing to front the funds to repair it, a shared office space company that has somehow valued at $47 billion just so a Japanese banking conglomerate can avoid realizing any losses.
Ah, damn, we Laboro. I remember
that. Yeah, I mean, I think...
Wouldn't it be Laborum?
Riley, don't try and Latin me.
Sorry, Patrick, carry on.
This is such the fancy classics boys episode.
Yeah, I think the big... that was the thing I realized like several years into studying like the end of the Roman world. It was just all these little things. It's like, you can see this happen. Like, so I tracked in very great detail where letters were sent. And what becomes very clear is that as the Roman state falls apart, like people's worlds get smaller. Like you can't send a letter as far. There's a lot less kind of long distance communication and contact. And that's reflected in the economic that's reflected in the economic picture too. Like goods just don't travel as far. Like everybody's world gets more local and it gets more smaller. And I think that more smaller, Jesus. It's just like, and I think that's a reflection of the whole thing. It's like a road falls apart and nobody repairs it. You put up a border where there wasn't a border before, and now you can't go talk to your cousin. That's like small stuff, but in the aggregate, it matters a very, very, very great deal. And like like how a military establishment falls apart is the same deal. And like there's that really, really sad story of how the soldiers from it's Rhaetia, so like kind of what's now more like towards Switzerland and Austria, like how the soldiers there sent somebody to go check on their pay, and the barbarians killed the guy as he was going to look for it, and then the province falls apart. Like that's the story. Like that's the story of the end of the Roman Empire. It's not like the Visigoths in Rome pulling a statue down with ropes for doing statues of Lenin at the end of the Soviet Union, or Saddam Hussein in 2003. Like that's not the end of the empire is really sad kind of day-to-day stuff. And I think it's the same thing now. It's masks not showing up to a hospital fighting a pandemic. It's, the president's son-in-law trying to do like capital D deals to get ventilators for cheaper, and then nobody getting the ventilators. Like that to me is the essence of the end of an empire. Or like how many bridges in the United States need to be replaced, are literally falling apart, or like poison, or like
building
water
British
pipes that are
bridges
doing
in US politics. We love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's stuff like that. Like,
well, the thing I think about, right, when it comes to this as well, is the fact that in Britain for like the last 10 years, shortfalls in education funding have been such that teachers on sort of decreasing real term salaries are having to go out and purchase school supplies for their students so they can continue teaching lessons.
Yeah.
And so like that can tick over for a while, but not forever.
But it's like it's interesting you said that, because like Patrick, you mentioned the military aspect. That's my vibe. That's my deal. And like exactly the same thing. You can fight a lot of wars. You can win a lot of wars. Even you can, if you want, you can do the Mithridatic Wars, and you can create this kind of giant Middle Eastern proxy that's very profitable and then sucks in all of your establishments, Saudi Arabia. But like eventually you start like there's a leak in that boat, and it's gonna fucking build up over time, and eventually you start losing in Germania,
Yeah. It's even like, think about roads, right? Like you can have, you've got this enormous empire spanning series of roadways, right? Now, maybe you've got like a bridge falls apart in your local neighborhood, and the aristocrat is like, I like that bridge. I'm going to go, I'll send my tenant farmers down to fix it.
You can keep it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll go send them down to do that. But that doesn't fix the next bridge over, because maybe that aristocrat doesn't do it, or maybe there isn't anybody there who decides it's a big enough deal. That doesn't fix the bridge 100 miles away. That doesn't fix the road that washes away in a flash flood 300 miles away. Like at some point you need to be like, you need these large scale state level systems to work in order to maintain the whole. And I think that to me is one of the big lessons, is like, even if on a local level, like you see barbarian kings would set up the occasional mile marker when they fixed a road or fixed a bridge or something, and they'd be like, look, king whatever of the Burgundians fixed this road. But that doesn't do anything for the road that washed away 10 miles away. Like
this is why we're not anarchists, I suppose.
Yeah.
And we'll get into this. I have a thing later about this.
Yeah. So, but before we talk about it later,
we've had enough of roads here in Cisalpine Gaul, because it's all the roads that's been bringing people coming over here, and that's why we need a border, because you've got all these people from Transalpine Gaul coming over here with their genders. We don't want it.
So before we carry on to peering into the future, there's one more passage from your article that I want to read, Patrick. When the real issues come up, healthy states, the ones capable of handling and minimizing everyday dysfunction, so like these roads washing away and stuff, have a great deal more capacity to respond than those happily waltzing towards their end. But by the time the obvious glaring crisis arrives and the true scale of the problem becomes clear, it's too late. The disaster, whether it's a major crisis of political legitimacy, the coronavirus pandemic, or the climate catastrophe, doesn't so much break the system as show just how broken this system already was.
Wait, you're saying Kim Kardashian didn't really break the internet? She just showed how broken the internet already was?
We make an exception for the Kardashians around here.
Yes. And I think like this shows us, right, that there are some polities are just weathering these crises differently and more effectively than others. Those that have decided to
politicule.
Those that have decided to systematically dig away at their own capacity to do anything for the purposes of line go up, they're the ones that are suffering most, and the ones that still have state capacity to respond to problems by just making solutions happen, whether that's rebuilding a road washed away by a flood or standing up a plague hospital in 10 days like they did in Wuhan, right? Like, this means that different polities, much like they did also in ancient Rome, as Britain and Provence and Ravenna would have experienced the fall of Rome differently, different polities are weathering the crisis of global neoliberalism differently. And so then we can ask how this theory that these different polities weather the same crisis differently, how does that augur for our future?
So glad we have the soundboard.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I think take Denmark as a good example of this. Like, Denmark is not perfect. I think this is not an endorsement of everything the state of Denmark has ever done or will do or is doing right now. But look at how relatively straightforward it was for Denmark to figure out how to keep people getting money and keep the economy relatively online during this pandemic, right? They were just like, okay, if you don't fire anybody, you'll keep it. We'll send money to firms, and you will keep getting paid, right? That only happened.
The money from the Muslim re-education camps, which we don't need at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, not an endorsement of everything the Danish state is doing
you just,
at this moment.
Skim it off of the top of the giant hoard of like looted refugee jewelry. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. That's where we start. But like, that's a simple, straightforward, viable solution to that particular problem, right? How are you going to keep people employed? How are you going to bring your economy back online? Hopefully, as soon as you don't have to be sheltering in place anymore. That's how you do it. That's not something that the United States is capable of doing. We do not have the state capacity to handle that. Either there is not enough political will to do it. It's a technical challenge that the American bureaucracy cannot handle. We have no way here of making that, of even approaching that as an option for us to work with. Like, that's a looted state can't do that. I mean, like, how do you end up with, a better than nothing, but still terrible coronavirus relief bill? Because essentially nobody left at the highest levels of American federal government has any idea how to legislate. Like, that is not a skill set that has been selected for over the past few decades. Like, the people who are still left who know how to do that, nobody's listening to them.
Well, especially I think that's true because, again, since the revolution of 1980, we reimagined government's main job as getting out of the way. And so we basically got the party mechanisms chose a bunch of people who were brilliant at reducing the government's role and enabling the private markets everywhere they possibly could. And so then you end up with something like Sam Brownback, who creates like...
that's an Urban Dictionary ass name.
He was Kansas or Kentucky?
Kansas.
Kansas. Yeah, Kansas under Sam Brownback, where he was like, okay, we're going to privatize literally everything. We're not going to leave anything there. But if you ask Sam Brownback or like any of the Ben Sass or whatever to actually do something rather than just undo something, just the same thing with the conservatives in power here. You're asking ministers whose whole brief, their whole career, has been undo things, undo the state, roll it back.
It's fine. You just let the market step in, and the market will do it. And the problem is that you've hollowed out the state infrastructure that makes those markets possible to the point where like you can't depend on, like, we talk about like the People's Republic of Walmart or whatever, or we talk about Amazon as a political actor, as like a logistical actor. It has long been this kind of parasite on the US Postal Service, amongst others. And for this, like, Amazon is not going to fucking help you deliver ventilators for the same reason that during like the late Roman Empire, you're not going to be able to keep up your business mining tin in Hispania and selling it in fucking Lebanon. It just isn't possible anymore.
Damn, the Patreon of its day, truly.
It's so much of what used to be state capacity is now in private hands. It reminds me a lot the situation that we're edging toward now of the later Middle Ages and the early modern period, where states had to cut deals with non-state actors in order to perform state functions, right? Like, so to collect taxes in the late 15th, early 16th centuries, if you're the city of London and you need tax money, you can't collect it yourself. You have to cut deals with the guilds to get them to do the tax collecting for you. That's
made
not
a very
just
good deal with the guilds. A fantastic deal. Honestly, the rope makers, the tailors, they're going to be collecting a lot of taxes, and by that I mean a large amount.
Yeah, we got a lot from the Mercers. The Mercers are doing great. The Spicers doing great things. I think there's. I think there's just a lot of like what we're realizing now as we're in this situation is just how much of what was formerly state capacity is in private hands, and how little you can force those private hands to do. Or how little will there is to make those private hands do anything.
Yeah, we get to my theory at this point, because I developed a theory. I developed a very scientific historical theory about this, about which way things can go from here, about sort of which way Western man. And I thought of the political compass, where you have like authoritarian, libertarian, left, right?
Mm-hmm.
I changed those axes to a very scientific good and bad, and big policy and small policy, right? So depending on how things fracture, because like as we've talked about, there were like the Roman Empire, diverse place, and so you ended up with some places that remained very powerful, and that's how you get the Eastern Roman Empire. So like it's entirely possible that you have a bad small policy is just like everything fractures, and you work for the Sports Direct guy's fief. You work for like the Guild of Posters or whatever, and their political power extends 50 meters down the road, and then there's another guy who's exactly like that.
Unfortunately, Mike Ashley has been killed by the Parthians on an ill-fated expedition.
And like I think that's very possible. Also, there is like, I suppose, possibly a good version of this, which is like the people setting up mutual aid networks, which again will never be able to do state capacity stuff, but will be able to maybe, I don't know, make sure that people in that 50-meter radius don't starve, which is nice. Whereas the big policies, as they survive, where we want to be is the big question mark, is the big policy good politics, right? I don't know if that's possible. I don't know what that looks like. What I do know what looks like is big policy bad politics, and that is California secedes, is largely self-sufficient, and you are Basileus Gavin Newsom the 13th's eunuch secretary.
You hate to see that.
That's bleak, man.
Yeah, I know. I'm fun at parties.
What if your politics was really big, Black Mirror?
So I'm curious, like how like, and this is a question just for everybody, for the floor, is how do we feel? What do we feel the potential like the fractures are in our society? What do we think are potentially powerful actors in a world where like the established order is not going to necessarily hold up? Do we think like China is going to remain cohesive? I think probably. What do we think about the US military or Amazon or the EU or whatever else?
There'll be two groups of people who we're going to be more dependent on. The first is going to be the volunteer border guards, the home counties dads,
100%.
who like, this is their moment. And I guess they're like, they're going to be like the modern day guilds, right? And the second are the incels who studied the blade when we were all going out to parties, and now we're seeking their help.
I love to like unite all of London under like the warrior Deliveroo kings of Wessex.
Those guys going around on mopeds with fucking scimitars.
I think that's hilarious. But B, I think that like that question does assume a lot of quite dramatic immediate collapse, and right, like I think it's not necessarily a given.
I'm not saying that this is all going to happen overnight. I'm not saying you're going to wake up tomorrow and be on Mike Ashley's farm. I'm saying that we talked about this happening within like the scale of a lifetime. Do we think that we are going to be of old age in a world that still contains a United States of America or a European Union or a United Kingdom?
So if you had asked me that question 4 years ago, I would have laid I would have thought it was a possibility, but I would have laid relatively long odds against that outcome. As we look at it right now in 2020, that looks a lot more likely to me. I mean, I just think there are so many fracture points and points of friction within the United States that like it's increasingly easy to foresee scenarios in which other levels of political organization either emerge or become more salient, right? So like imagine a hypothetical scenario here, like where the Trump administration says, oh no, we're going to reopen everything. We're going to reopen everything. And the governor of California and the governor of New York and the governor of New Jersey just tell him to go fuck himself, which is the likeliest outcome there, right? So that's not an immediate thing because we're like, oh, Trump's a joke. Maybe he loses in November, whatever. But in the long run, you now have an established precedent for state governors just ignoring a federal directive, right? And so that's the scenario in which these things snowball and become increasingly salient. And maybe, you've already got the governors of New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Connecticut all talking about how they're going to jointly deal with the coronavirus. Like, that's not that far to imagine how an ad hoc informal organization like that can become more formalized and represent an alternative form of political organization. Those are the kinds of scenarios that just look increasingly more likely and become increasingly more likely as you put society under pressure and states under pressure through a crisis like this. I don't know. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I the one thing I would say, and as part of this, like, I'm not laying out my bets here. I just want to ask it as an open question and have the listener think about this. I'm not making like a 28-way parlay on this state succeeds and this state doesn't or whatever.
But like for the listener.
Yeah. But what I do want to, what I want to remind people of, because I always do the thing where we talked about this stuff before the coronavirus. The thing I would say was we had maybe like 10 years of relative normalcy left to be distributed for climate change. That's still true, which is fun. But also we're like maybe 2 weeks away from the peak of the coronavirus deaths. And I don't know how that's going to change matters. And I want people to bear that in mind.
Well, I think people are already rationalizing it in a way as to like just uphold the current state of things. It's like all the people being like, and this is people who I didn't realize were like this lib, like brain fucked, but like all the people who are like, oh, fucking Bay Rishi Sunak. And it's like, he's a Tory. He's gonna keep doing that. He is being forced to give you some shit that you want by this like world-ending circumstance. And as soon as he cannot do that, he will.
The way I tend to approach thinking about this kind of thing is by thinking about systems and how systems can respond and what options they have as systems to respond to challenges that are put in front of them. So, for example, Amazon is a system. Amazon is a system that depends on the United States Postal Service. But also the governments of California and New York are also systems that depend on the Fed producing money. And
for now, Mr. Chopper.
So the question then is, how long can the say California and New York, the governors who are probably going to tell Trump to go fuck himself when he says to go back to work, how long can they hold out when, say, they're not able to print their own money? We actually had a comparable problem in Europe with the Eurozone crisis, which was threatening the stability of the system. Greece and Italy and Greece and Italy were telling Germany to fuck off and vice versa. And, you had this impossible trinity where they were experiencing macroeconomic shocks differently. They weren't able to print their own money, and yet that money was freely floating against other currencies. They were in an impossible situation, and austerity was the only way through that. So a system placed under stress creates a norm of austerity to save itself. So my question is...
California will just introduce Elon Musk bucks, surely.
I tell you what, though, I'm feeling great about my one-day Duolingo Mandarin streak.
and so the systems of New York and California are going to be, if they do ignore Trump's order, are going to be facing another systemic challenge where they are going to very quickly, like we always say, where are you going to pay for it? We always say, the Fed, print money, fuck it, money printer go burr. But they can't make the money printer go burr.
No,
so they're going to be put into a situation. Alice, that's what I'm getting to. They're going to be put into a situation where they may have to make that kind of decision.
Elon Musk bucks. Yeah.
But we're asking what the mechanism is that, say, leads to the splintering of the U.S. polity. It is the collision of irreconcilably different forces that need to create a new system in order to both perpetuate themselves.
I hope that when California starts pressing coins, they just do the same thing that King Offa did and accidentally print the Shahada on them.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I mean, that's my 2 cents.
I love working at the mint of California and printing the Shahada on the coins.
I mean, one option here that we haven't that I don't think we fully appreciate enough is okay, so can you just keep the United States as some kind of currency union and keep the Fed, but ditch other federal government functions? Because wouldn't that be the easiest solution to this? Is sure, you've got a president, but you just ignore him,
like a Holy Roman Emperor.
Exactly. That's exactly the parallel I was going for is everybody's just doing their thing. And you've got this guy who's going to issue the odd proclamation, but nobody really pays attention.
He's just this weird inbred guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's got a jaw that extends out 2 feet. He can't sire any children, but he's there. So
he's from Spain for some reason.
He eats McDonald's just 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I think one thing I would say is that I keep coming back to this idea of Claudia Metelli as Roman Meghan McCain talking about her father, and I want to really fix in my mind the image of the Roman Pod Save Johns, or the Roman James Ball, or the Roman Bill Kristol, who is no, we don't have to change. Actually, this is fine.
Damn. The Pod Save Johns are a triumvirate of sorts.
I want to think about the guy who is this world that we are now, I think, inevitably leaving behind in some way or another, had all of these virtues, but who identifies every single one of those virtues incorrectly. I want to think about that guy. Because the thing about the Roman Empire was you could fucking get schnippers anytime you wanted, right?
See, I know we posed a hard question to you, Patrick, but can you think of that kind of Roman version of our modern day doofus?
Yes. So there's a Gallic aristocrat.
Yes, I love how quickly you came out with that.
Oh no, I have exactly the guy. There was a Gallic aristocrat named Ruricius of Limoges who wrote a bunch of letters, and he managed to, over the course of this large surviving letter collection, it's 60 something letters, managed to say absolutely nothing about the world he lived in, about the broader world that he lived in. He was just fundamentally unconcerned. He lived in what was then the Visigothic kingdom. But if you're reading his letters, you would never know really that anything has changed at all. This guy was just he was doing his poetry, and he was eventually the bishop, but because he still had kids, he was just the bishop, because that's now the job that an aristocrat has in this immediately post-Roman city. You would read this guy's letters and think that nothing important had changed and be oh, things were pretty cool back then, but things are pretty cool now. We've still got blah, 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 blah. That's the guy.
Oh my God, he's the kind of person who loves Saturday Night Live clapbacks about Trump. He's that we could have had 4 years of Kate McKinnon doing Elizabeth Warren impressions.
He's
exactly.
He's Charlie Kirk. Does Charlie Kirk never go out of 2016, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say I'm imagining this guy more as someone who's saying, yeah, things would be great if only we could get that orange Odoaker out of there.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Anyway, but at the end of the day, the existence of for that guy, the key point is that the existence of the orange Odoaker doesn't do anything to him.
No,
right?
He's going to be just fine.
Yeah, he's fun. Those guys are fundamentally disconnected from any of the negative outcomes. Of that change.
Makes me so angry. I hope we have more of a French Revolution vibe where those guys absolutely are not fine, and it drives them insane for the next 300 years.
I mean, I love thinking about this doofus in Gaul who set up the Emperor Nero Institute for Fiscal Stability.
There was a whole class of those dudes. They kept writing letters like nothing had changed, using the same god-awful language that's almost impossible to translate, making the same god-awful jokes, sending their fail sons to do the exact same thing. It's
epic epistolary clapbacks.
Exactly.
No, oh my God.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I realized who this is. This is like Roman Julia Hartley Brewer, right? Where like even though you're in the midst of a global pandemic, the issue is still trans people.
Or it's the same thing. All of their letters actually end with an advertisement for a company that will come bring you a reclining couch, and then they'll take it back after 100 days.
That's exactly it.
And if you
There's
use
amazing powders and ointments that will help the function of your animus.
and if you use the promo code Nepos, then we'll give you 20 sesterces off if you buy on the Ides. Anyway, so with that under wraps, and with now having thoroughly explored how neither the ancient Roman world nor the current world orders really have the institutional options to deal with the existential threats they face towards the end of their time, largely for reasons of their own doing.
I, for one, feel a lot better.
Yeah.
we all just start falling at this point.
Well, welcome to gravity, baby. Well, feel its embrace.
What's the Alan Bennett line? History is just one fucking thing after another.
Sometimes very fast. But Patrick, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. This has been a blast.
Thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
It's been great. We've got to have you back on.
Yes, absolutely.
Would love to, anytime.
But for a sillier, maybe we'll like review a movie or something.
Oh, yeah.
Gladiator.
The 2004 masterpiece King Arthur. Any interest?
Yeah.
We should do that.
Lots of interest.
That'd be dope.
Hell yeah, baby.
What about the King Arthur from a couple of years ago with David Beckham in it for some reason?
Oh my God. I love that movie so much. It was so stupid. It was so stupid and I love it.
Sold. All right, we're gonna. Okay, thank you. Don't forget to check out Tides of History. Don't forget to check out our Patreon in a couple of months. We have Patrick back on to watch the Guy Ritchie King Arthur movie because we'll all still be in quarantine.
I saw that on a date in Russian. If you just, oh, it wasn't a good date.
That story to be told in full then. Yes. Don't forget also, you know what it is. We have that Patreon. Sign up for it for more of us and our japes and observations.
Get a goddamn t-shirt to wear in your house.
Please buy a t-shirt. We've not been mentioning it on the episodes, but there are t-shirts. Buy them. Email the address, and you will have one.
Yes, you know what it is
in the description. Yeah,
line must go up. Anyway,
the Trash Future line must continue to go up. Whatever happens to the other lines.
In this case, the line is just like cleanliness of Milo's mum's hallway.
Exactly.
Remove the t-shirts from the hallway. Anyway, okay. Thank you all for listening. Thank you again, Patrick. Our theme song is Here We Go by Ginseng. Catch it on Spotify. You've got time. You have no excuse not to listen to it. And we'll see you on the Patreon on Thursday or see you back on the free feed next Tuesday. Later.